Hey losers, I'm Coral. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here today with the books that I finished in the second half of the month. As you can tell from my nasally stuffed up voice, the last couple days I've not gotten very much reading done because I'm feeling better now, mostly, except for like just the residual coughing stuff up out of my lungs and kind of being stuffed up, but I have a really bad, pretty sure it's just allergies because one, I am allergic to just almost any environmental thing that you can think of, so that makes sense. Also, no one else in my house got sick, so I'm assuming it's just allergies, but man, I had the worst sinus headache for days that I just couldn't shake. And you know, so there are those people who are like sick in bed, read this book, like how? I've never had the type of sick where I'm like in bed reading. What kind of sick is that? I don't know. If I'm sick in bed, I'm barely alive, you know? So anyway, I did read a couple books here. Let's go through the stats. Now these are for the month in total. I read 15 books. That includes a book that I DNF'd. 9 of these books were off of my TBR, so these are books that I owned previous to this year. I read 4,779 pages, which is about 170 pages per day. 8 of these were horror books, 2 were nonfiction, 3 were science fiction, and 2 were literary fiction. The oldest book I read this year came out in 1979, and the most recent book was published in 2024. Is there a point in going through all the years? I'll tell you about them as I hold them up, I suppose. So, I don't even know. Why am I asking you? I'm the one who did this. I like to keep track of the series of the books that I'm talking about, or the books that I'm reading. So as far as that goes, I did start 3 book series this month. One for sure I will not be continuing with. The other 2 I enjoyed. So I will be talking about one of those in this pile here that you can't see, but it's here. So I did finish 8 books in the last 2 weeks of the month. 3 of those were digital. So I'm going to tell you about those because otherwise I forget because they are not here beside me. First being The House That Horror Built by Christina Henry. This was a new release audiobook that I rented from my library. Now this one was a little bit on the shorter end, just barely over 300 pages. I found it to be very compelling, although it does feel really slower paced. I feel like because it is super character driven and, to be honest, not very spooky. Like, there are not very many spooky things happening. I feel like what was compelling to me were the characters, and there is this sense of mystery, although it was a little predictable, kind of. But I just really liked the characters, I guess, is what got me. So this is about Harry, a single mom to a teenage boy. She has just like really clawed her way through life to give her son, what he needs. And boy, she grew up in a really strict religious household, and hearing some of that, like, oh god, it almost was like a flashback. It was like, oh god, no. I was really like, oh great, I'm going to have a lot to talk to my therapist about the next time I meet with her. Things like not being able to watch anything rated higher than a G rating. Over here in America, that's like, I don't know. What is that? What is that even? Like, even children's movies, most children's movies have a higher than G rating. Oh boy, so that was, anyway, but that's just my brain getting hung up on that, wanting to fixate on it. It's during the pandemic, and she has this job a few days a week cleaning the house of a movie director, not super well known, maybe like a B movie director, maybe more than a B movie director. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. He's not like Martin Scorsese level movie director, you know? And really his character reminded me of Guillermo del Toro a little bit. And then there's like somebody else who gets involved who is like, oh, that's totally Doug Jones, which like made this like matchup in my head and make me even more sense. But so she's cleaning for him. He lives by himself, but he used to have a family. And there's kind of like this like sordid thing about what happened to his family. Harry gets to know her employer a little more personally, and it's almost like a snowball effect, and she can't really put the brakes on it. So I think that's all I can tell you about it. But I found this really entertaining. But like I said, there are not very many like horror, scary to me parts. What I liked was the story. I think that's what I liked, you know, that's what kept me reading. And looking at the reviews, people are like, this is not scary. And it's like, okay, but it has horror elements. Like it really felt more like a gothic novel, I think, to me. Like atmosphere, a very strange house with strange things happening, like secrets, you know. I think maybe if this had been, I don't know, maybe I'll have to look at the synopsis again, but maybe this should have been marketed a little bit differently. But when you put like horror movie in there, people are thinking something that maybe is not necessarily gothic, you know. I don't know, but I thought this was really good. The other audiobook I listened to this month was The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montell. This is another 2024 release. I listened to and really loved her book Cultish, which came out a couple years ago, and that was a lot about language, and this is also a lot about language and pop culture and things like that, the words that we use, and kind of how, I don't know, these things like manifest destiny and you know, toxic positivity kind of things, how they've affected people's lives. But it is really like kind of more of a collection of essays. I feel like each chapter really does feel like a standalone topic, which in some ways is nice. I do think after reading it, I'm like, what's my takeaway here? For me, I don't really know. It was entertaining, but I feel like when I read Cultish, it was like, oh, this gives me kind of a sense of understanding of certain things. When I read this one, I'm not really sure. Besides, like, maybe spend less time on social media, which, could I spend less time? Yes, but I feel like I've got, at least now, like a good sense of like myself and not letting social media influence how I feel about myself, you know what I mean? Which I feel like this book talks a lot about that. So I don't know, like for me, I don't really know if I took anything away from reading this, but it was good. I think I like Cultish better though. Oh, I haven't talked so much in days. My throat is so sad. Okay, so then I read part of an early copy of a book I had, Supplication by Nour, Abi-Nakhoul. This came from NetGalley, and this was on my most anticipated of the year, first half of the year, I guess, since I'm hopefully filming my second half of the year stuff today, if my voice can handle it. This sounded like experimental, strange, but I think it might have been too strange and experimental for me. I got about 15% in, but honestly, I read the first page and I was like, oh no. something about the writing. It was just so busy. It's like there are so many words, and yet what do they mean? You know? I mean, it's one thing to have purple prose that, oh gosh, I don't mean to be disparaging to the author. Of course, this is me reviewing a book and not a person. But it's one thing to have purple prose. There are authors like Cassandra Khaw and Eric LaRocca who come to mind when I think of people who have like kind of floral writing, but I feel like you can have too much of that. And I feel like, honestly, Cassandra Khaw is a little bit too much of that for me. And this was like ramping it up even. Like, we got through pages, I got through pages of this book and nothing happened. And even at the 15% mark, I still didn't know what happened, because it was like all these little intricacies and little tiny details and talking about like bugs in the brain and the bug drama and like, what? I just, what? I don't know. So I think I knew from page 1 that I was going to put it down, but I gave it a little bit of a try. I made it to about 15% in, and that's where I stood with that. Too much bug drama. I mean, like, the bug drama came up over and over again in the 15% that I read. Like, the words bug drama. So that was a new release as well, 2024. All right, next I'd like to talk about my TBR card pick for this month. This was We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. This came out in 2003, and in this we're following a mother, Eva, who is writing letters to her estranged husband, Franklin, about their teenage son, Kevin, who is now in prison for killing a number of his schoolmates and also like a teacher and a custodian or a cafeteria worker at his school, and is just like reflecting on their relationship together. Eva didn't really want to be a parent, and she chose to do that anyways. You know, so there's all that in there. So is it like nature versus nurture stuff? Is Kevin really an evil child? Eva seems to think that he was born this way, and Franklin always has insisted that there was nothing wrong with Kevin. So, it's really interesting. I will say, while I enjoyed this, it really did take some time to get into, because Eva is not a character I like, really no one in this book is a character I particularly liked. But being that we're being told the story through only Eva's perspective was hard at times, especially like in the beginning before Kevin comes into the picture. Eva is just kind of fucking insufferable. She is pretentious. She thinks she's right about everything. Honestly, she definitely has like holier than thou vibes. Period. Whether she's right or whether she's wrong, it gets grating. And in the beginning, when she's just talking to Franklin about their relationship, it's fucking boring as shit. Like, I don't give a shit. I mean, I know it kind of, yeah, you kind of need the building blocks for the rest of the story, but like, ugh, it was just, that was hard to get through. However, once Kevin comes into the picture, oh my god, I couldn't put this book down. It was so interesting, heartbreaking, frustrating, especially because like Eva and Franklin both are like, ugh, so frustrating. And Kevin too, of course, but like, they're just, I just wanted to slap them both. Frustrating people. Frustrating fake people. I also read another of Stephen Graham Jones's book this month. This is The Last Final Girl. This was published in 2012. And this was strange and hard to follow at times. This definitely is an experimental way to tell a story. Let me see if I can find a good page where this is exhibited a lot. Don't read the text, but maybe you can see all these arrows on the side here. It skips around a lot, almost like it's a script, but it's not really. Or like they're stage directions almost. You get POVs and stuff like that. Anyways, this is about this girl who at the very beginning of the book like escapes from a slasher killer, and she is a high school student. So like she comes back to the high school and everyone's like, ah, you know, it's a little bit meta, you know? Everyone knows that she's the final girl, but she puts together like this homecoming court, and the other people, or the other women on it, the other girls are also final girls. So it's like, is she trying to become like the final girl? I don't know. There is this character, like really the one that you follow the most in here. What is her name? Is Izzy? I can't remember if her name is Izzy. I feel like it is. But she really reminds me a lot of Jade Daniels. So it really wouldn't surprise me if she was like the Jade Daniels prototype that, you know, got made into, or the real fleshed out Jade Daniels from My Heart is a Chainsaw. If she really felt that way. So there's a lot about like horror movies, slashers in that. It's, I don't know, not my favorite Stephen Graham Jones, not terrible. A lot of jumping around, moving parts, kind of funny at times. You know, it doesn't take itself too seriously because it's meta, you know, it kind of does that thing that Scream does where it kind of has to make fun of itself in ways, or it would be stupid, you know? It has to be that way, or it would be stupid. But I think my favorite read of the last 2 weeks has been Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. This is his newest release. It just came out this month. And boy, this is another book about horror movies, as you can tell. So this was written in a kind of experimental way too. That was really interesting. So we're following, oh my god, I'm just realizing, I'm not sure if we ever, do we find out what his name is? I feel like we do. I don't know. I can't remember. Oh, now I'm thinking like, oh my god, is there this part of the story that is like so deep and weird that okay, sorry. I feel like we don't ever find, okay. Okay, so anyway, in the 90s, this group of young adults, like college age students, filmed this like indie film that they call Horror Movie, and they film it, but it never gets like aired. It never gets like produced really, except for like 3 clips that eventually get released onto the internet. And since those clips were released onto the internet, now it's kind of got this cult following, and it's become kind of infamous for having these strange things happen on set. And there's only one remaining member of like the cast and crew. So when a reboot finally happens, he's into it, and so we're like in the present when this reboot is happening, and we're also in the past while the first Horror Movie is being made with this group of friends. And so you're reading through the past, but also you're reading through kind of what is like the screenplay, and it's like all these, it feels like 3 different parts to me, like the past, the screenplay, and the present. They all are branches that eventually like flow into one, you know, one river. Does that, no, I don't know, I'm just being stupid. But it's like you are getting these little pieces of the mystery, like what happened on set, because you know that something bad happened like at the end of the production of this, the end of the filming of this movie, but you don't know what it is. And the surviving member is like kind of fucking weird, and has some weird shit like going on with him, and like what is happening, what actually happened with this fucking film. And it's just really mysterious. It's got like the Tremblay touch on it, you know, is what is happening like preternatural. What the fuck is going on? Horror movies. An ending that is fucking weird, and still now I'm like, oh, what the fuck, you know? So I just really loved this. I think it came together so well. Then when we got to the end, I was like, oh no, it's going so well. Is the end gonna suck? And it didn't. It was really good. The last two most recent novels of his that I've read, like, not the ones I've read most recently, but the ones he's published most recently, Survivor Song and Paul Bear's Club, I really did not like those. So I'm really glad that this was as enjoyable for me as it was. Okay, I also read Scream and Scream Again. This was not edited by R.L. Stine, but it's R.L. Stine Presents. This came out in 2018, and this is a middle grade horror anthology that's like kind of in the vein of Goosebumps stories, but it's like every story begins and ends with a scream. And I thought that this was okay. I thought that, you know, all the stories in here were good storytelling, but also I'm an adult reviewing a book that is not made for my age group, you know. I will say that it just started to feel repetitive, like almost like these were like a moral of the story tales, kind of, where a lot of them were like kids being brave and not very many that like actually felt spooky. So I don't know, that part of it was like, okay, can we get a spooky one? There was only like 2 in here that didn't have like a happy ending. Obviously you don't want to like traumatize children, but like, do they all have to be about kids being brave? I don't know. I'm just being a complainer. And finally, I read The 3 Body Problem by Cixin Liu. This was published in 2006, although I'm not sure if that was when it was originally published or if that was when it was published in English. This is translated by Ken Liu, who is a science fiction and fantasy author. I'm not really sure how much this diverges from the television show, because I read that the television show is all of book 1 but also gets into book 2 and 3. So I'm curious about that. But I will say that the drama very much kicked up in the TV show, also very much more characters. Also in this, it really all takes place in China. In the TV show, that's not the case. It's hard for me to tell, but there are some plot points in the show that seem, you know, it's hard to tell because I haven't read books 2 and 3 yet, but just from reading book 1, there's like some really big things that they added to the TV show that were not in this at all. I don't think that this was underwhelming, but it definitely didn't have like the drama that the TV show did. I still really liked it. I think that it maybe would have benefited from like 1 or 2 more characters, because we are following one main character in this really named Miao Wang, who is a scientist, and the government comes to him after this like death happens, and they're like, does this seem suspicious to you? Because let me tell you, there's some shit going on. And they kind of like take him into the fold and tell him that like there are a lot of these scientists who have been dying by suicide lately, and we're not really sure what to make of it yet, but it's suspicious. And so it kind of opens this whole can of worms, like, why are scientists doing this? And he himself starts to kind of be targeted by whatever is doing this. But there's also this virtual reality game that he's playing to try to solve what they call the 3 body problem, where this virtual world has this chaotic celestial body issue where sometimes it's way too cold, sometimes it's way too hot. The civilization can't grow and flourish because their people are being fucking fried or frozen all the time. So he's like trying to solve that, and there's just all these strange things that end up, you know, kind of coming together. And it's really an interesting story and very hard to give you a small, concise synopsis on, because it is a big story. And like, looking at it, I'm like, that's all in this? Like, this is only like 400 pages. That's all in this? I can't believe that. That is fucking wild. So there is a lot of science-y talk in this. Sometimes that was hard for me. I was like, I do not grasp this. It was interesting, and I'm definitely continuing on with this series to see where this fucking goes. And that wraps up my June reading for you guys. Thank you for watching. I would love to know what you've read this month. If you read anything good, tell me about it. If you've read any of these, tell me about it. I'd love to hear what you thought about them. Otherwise, I will see you later. Goodbye.